I was the boss, and some guy wasn't paying attention and had his arm on the bar behind him on the forklift he was backing up. He backed up right into a container and all but severed his arm. Just a small flap of skin was holding it on. He ran in the building, spurting blood all over, and I ran over and stopped him, sat him down, and got one of the guys to get me some stuff for an improvised tourniquet. I held his severed arm under mine, and I squeezed the upper arm to slow the flow until I could get the tourniquet on and tight. All the while I was getting covered in his blood from head to toe. I finally got it stopped and sat there trying to keep him calm while the paramedics were on the way. After they took over, I asked the firemen that accompanied them if they could blast me off with the fire hose. They blasted all the blood off, but my clothes were ruined. I sat outside until I dried and then went home and showered well and threw the stained clothes away. I got dressed and went back to work to help the crew clean up the blood and toss the chair he was in the trash. I could taste his blood the rest of the day. It even got up my nose. I didn't notice until I went home again, but my mustache and goatee were stained from the blood too. I had to shave clean. They were able to reattach his arm, but it never worked right again. He went on permanent disability afterwards. I worked in a manufacturing facility as a buyer. I was in my office one day when I saw two of the product line supervisors sprint by and head toward the production floor. Seems a mechanic had tried to get a machine unjammed and had failed to turn the machine off. He reached in and the machine indexed and caught his arm. Then it indexed again and partially ripped it off. I was on the safety committee and trained in first aid, so I was called on to assist the plant nurse and safety director. I thought I was going to pass out. The guy was lying on his back, and what was left of his arm was shards of bone and tissue. I'll never forget it. We had someone electrocute themselves during their shift. Poor guy was only 18, went to plug in a floor buffer to an extension cord on the wall. The cord was faulty, but due to reasons was never replaced. When he plugged the buffer in, the shock dropped him, and away he passed, due to insurance and potential lawsuits from the family. Over the faulty equipment, the security footage of that night is sealed, and the company went crazy, afterwards removing every single extension cord they used. A man was murdered on aisle 8 in the freezer section of the grocery store I worked at. Happened 2 minutes after I left my shift for the day. One guy made inappropriate comments about the other guy's 14-year-old daughter, and he didn't like that. He stewed for a bit, took his groceries and family out to his car, went back inside, confronted the man. It turned physical. Guy knocked him to the ground and stomped his head into the ground. Afterwards, he went outside after someone called the police, went outside and said goodbye to his family, that he was going away for a long time, and waited for the police to arrive. I work in a restaurant. One evening, one of the salad tenders cut off the tip of his finger, and it was bad enough that he had to go to the hospital for it. Unfortunately, the salad he was making somehow made it out of the kitchen and onto a table. Shortly after, a guest complained about something chewy in their salad that they thought was a piece of bacon, and they didn't want bacon in their salad. The salad guy couldn't find the tip of his finger before he left. Long story. I worked in a nursing home kitchen for a month back in 2017. Thankfully, it was a temporary job as I was on summer break from university. There were so many things that were up with that place, and I kept on questioning my boss, the head cook, and the care home manager about many things. Firstly, raw meat was stored on the top shelf in the fridge. So unhygienic. Not to mention that some of the kitchen staff had very poor personal hygiene too. I once saw one of my colleagues drop a boiled egg on the floor. To my horror, he put it straight back on the plate and gave it to a resident. That's before we even get to some of the carers. I knocked on residents' doors when I entered a resident's room. One of the senior carers pulled me up about that, but I told him to do one. Thankfully, the head cook had my back about that. Once I noticed that one of the stair banisters was loose in the dementia unit, which many residents used, and mentioned it to the maintenance guys. When they didn't do anything, I went straight to the care home manager to demand that it got done. She managed to turn the subject around from a health and safety issue to me losing my job if I didn't shut up and toe the line. I was just speechless. Oh, and the activities coordinator was one of the most horrible people I'd ever met. She was in charge when the manager wasn't around, but she was even worse than the manager. She acted so nice to the residents and their families, but she treated all the carers and the kitchen staff like dog shit, and used to go on frequent power trips. I remember on one evening shift, one of the nurses was unhappy because she thought I had served dessert portions too small. No issue, I offered to fix it. The nurse wasn't having that and got the activities coordinator, and 5 minutes later she gave me an absolute dressing down in front of all my colleagues. I must admit I nearly walked out, but I didn't want to screw the guys in the kitchen over either, as they were already short-staffed as it was. It was at that point that I decided, I'm never coming back to this place once this shift is over. The head cook texted me that evening after I'd finished work, and basically told me that whilst he liked me, I was not welcome back at all. Apparently I'd pissed off the higher-ups for talking back and being disrespectful. I had a feeling it was coming anyway, though, and went back to university to complete my degree. Every time I have a bad day at my current job, I always think, at least I'm not at the nursing home. Thankfully, one of the kitchen staff who I had always got on with quit his job not long after that and reported the nursing home to the council as an anonymous whistleblower. The council sent an inspector to the home, and they noticed everything that was wrong. Apparently, the care home manager got a massive fine, yet somehow still kept her job. To my amusement, though, she complains in the town's Facebook group about being short-staffed. I worked in care for a very brief time. I had 3 shadow shifts following around experienced carers. Then I was sent out on my own. This was care in the community, so I was going to clients' houses, so I was completely on my own, except for if a client needed to be moved, turned in bed, or needs moving via a hoist. Then I would meet another carer at the house, because there always had to be 2 people. On my second day, I had to use a hoist to move a client from a wheelchair to their bed, but I was on my own, and I had not even seen this type of hoist, let alone been trained to use it. I called the office, and they told me to just do it. Mind you, if something went wrong, I would have no legal protection, because I was aware of the regulations, and more importantly, the vulnerable person I was there to help could have been seriously injured. I did not go back the next day. I worked for a large mutual fund company. A woman from a different department was quite distraught when she was fired. Later, she called her sister, who lived in a different state, and told her that she dreamed that she killed their mom. When the sister couldn't get a hold of their mom and learned that she hadn't shown up for work, she called the local police and asked them to do a welfare check. They found a makeshift altar in the basement with teddy bears and lit candles, and the mother, encased in 70 pounds of salt. The search was then on for the other daughter. She was found dead in her car, apparently from suicide. For a while after that, when my coworkers and I would annoy each other, we would say stuff like, "I heard Walgreens is having a sale on salt, 70 pounds for $5. I know this already sounds like bullshit, but it gets weirder. Apparently her father was in prison for killing his second wife's mother and, you guessed it, encasing her in salt. Edited to change the father's victim to his second wife's mother. Logistically speaking, it doesn't make sense for it to be his first wife's mother. But also, Agray found the news article and linked it below. The article also says that it was 700 pounds of salt. It's been over 20 years, but I swear I remember it was only 70. At the time I was a teacher, and the accusers were 2 students who I had taught several years prior, but not that school year. As a result of their age, I was unable to press charges or sue. I was told flat out by the union attorney that in cases exactly like this, the prosecutor would never take the case, and that the families were so destitute that collecting any awarded money would be useless. I taught at a Title I, inner-city school, where the kids came from nothing and whose families have nothing. These girls were on food stamps, public housing voucher, free lunch, etc. Afterwards, my colleagues supported me wholeheartedly. I had taught at the school for 5 years at that point, and was a mentor and veteran teacher, always earning the highest evaluations, mentoring early career teachers, writing curriculum for the district, facilitating professional development at work, etc. My colleagues were like, "I can't believe those bitches would do something like that," in the teacher's lounge. As a result of that situation, and the anxiety, anger that stemmed from it, and after advice from a good therapist, I started looking for jobs outside of the classroom, and landed a job in educational administration at the end of the school year. Haven't taught since then. It's weird. I always thought I would retire a badass teacher in my 60s, but it turns out that one shitty experience drove me out of the classroom for good. Was working as a CNA, certified nursing assistant, in a nursing home. Had a patient who had just gotten back from the hospital. Hospital sent patient back with a catheter, but since patient had not been using a catheter before when they were there, the nurse goes and removes the catheter, and we were to monitor to make sure the patient urinated. Later in the day, I worked 3 to 11 p.m. then, patient asks for help to go to the bathroom, which is great. I get patient onto the toilet and step out. They were with it and everything, so he put the call light on when he was done. Call light goes on, so I go in there to help him out. I help him stand up, and that's when I notice the toilet is full of blood and the man is bleeding like crazy out of his third arm, as I will call it. I sit the man down, quickly pop out to tell the nurse who comes in, sees the carnage, and immediately runs back out to go call 911. While the nurse does her thing, I stay with the man until paramedics show up. The man is bleeding so much, however, that before the paramedics arrive, the dude passes out from blood loss, and I ended up being forced to lower him down onto the floor as I cannot keep his limp body sitting up on the toilet. By the time the paramedics get there, which really isn't that long as they had good response times, I am just sitting there with this guy on the floor with which blood is just everywhere on that floor at this point. I was a CNA for 6 years and saw a lot of shit, including people dying, but that incident has stuck with me more than anything. I worked at a supermarket for 6 years, and I saw a few interesting things. This time, when I was working nights for a couple of months, I got to know the night team well. Generally sound guys, but there were a few I'd keep my distance from. It became apparent to me one morning when I was washing my hands and see something in the corner of my eye. A work shoe, which contained a human shit. After reporting this and there being some investigations into the phantom shitter, it happened again. This time a colleague of mine discovered it, having unfortunately put his shoe on before realizing the shit. One other occasion a colleague had finished using the toilet and then realized that there was a shit strategically balanced on the hook on the cubicle door. Upon this being reported, it was realized that this person could be caught. CCTV. Once the security guard managed to narrow footage down, questioning began. However, nothing came from it and no one got caught. I know that when I left the job 10 months ago, the culprit had neither owned up nor been caught. Word got out about 3 people that it could have been, but it just stopped being talked about, and everyone moved on. Whether or not this person left, we will never know. All we know is that a man liked to shit into people's shoes and balance them on things. I used to be a lift operator for a ski resort. A guest at the resort asked at closing if I knew where to get marijuana. I did, and I helped the guy out by taking him with me to go get some. The next day, he crashed headfirst into a tree. I happened to ski past the scene minutes after it happened, and before ski patrol responded, dude's head was in several pieces. I could tell from his jacket that it was the same guy.